Hey guys, Kid here of Burn One with the Shadowverse Evolve channel, bringing you a new series. It's a breakdown series for each craft. I'm going to try to do this for each meta whenever a new set drops, and after about a couple weeks into it or so, once we figured out exactly what's going on, I'd like to release these videos. It's going to just be a breakdown of the craft itself and like its strengths, weaknesses, key cards, things like that you'll be seeing in meta decks generally. So obviously we're starting off here with set 2 Swordcraft. I think most people are familiar with it. This is a tier 1 deck for sure, and I guess we'll just get into it. First things first here is we'll be talking about the strengths of Swordcraft. It's very consistent in my opinion. You have a lot of tools to, search up key cards over and over again, meaning that most of your games are going to feel very samey in that way. So you don't have to worry too much about like, what do I need to do on turn 3? What do I need to do on turn 4? Because you have your game plan, you're going to search out the cards you need, and you're able to do it like almost every game. Next, flexibility. The craft itself is pretty flexible when building the deck because it can go in any way at once, which is it can either go low to the ground and be really aggressive. It can be more tempo mid-range plays, and it can even be a little bit more, how do I say this? More like control-like there at the top end if you want it to be. Though sometimes those strategies aren't always the best way to be playing the deck, depending on the meta. It is always an option for this craft. I feel like it has a very wide way of playing in general. Kind of like goes back to the consistency as well for the flexibility part. Because you have cards that search things out, you're always able to toolbox, find the silver bullet in your deck for specific matchups. If you play like a one of for like dragon or something, you can always have the ability to search that one of out, and so you're consistently doing well in whatever matchup it is. Next, we have storm damage. This is one of the crafts that have probably the most storm damage followers here. This makes it so your opponent has to like reevaluate the board every turn to figure out like how much actual damage you could potentially push the next following turn if they leave up any followers, which is kind of scary. So it adds a lot of extra like unseen pressure on your opponent to figure out what the correct lines of play are, because at any point you can just drop one follower out of your hand and suddenly it's doing 6 storm damage on the turn it's played, and they left like 5 damage up and now they're doing 11 to face, which is very, very scary and very hard to deal with. Next, tokens. So this is one of the crafts that generate a lot of tokens onto the board naturally through its gameplay. It has followers that just generate extra followers on the board. So you kind of spread out your stats that you get off of followers. Obviously, the main one being Flora Fencer. You get like 7/7 worth of stats across 3 followers, which is pretty cool. Not a lot of other crafts do stuff like this. I think this is one of like the key things for Swordcraft right now. Finally, simple game plan. When I say simple game plan, I don't mean like the deck is like brain dead easy, though you might feel that way sometimes. I more mean is that when you go into every matchup, you don't really have to overthink about what is my game plan, what do I need to do to win, because generally your game plan is always going to be the same in every matchup. There are some times where you might have to like, make decisions that don't necessarily be like on turn 6 I have to play Leo or whatever. You might have to make some other choices and some hard choices in those scenarios, but when you go into a match you don't really have to think too hard about like, what do I have to do to win this match, because everything you do is straightforward. You're just like a spear going straight ahead, and that's your game plan. That's it. Next here we're going to talk about the weaknesses of Swordcraft. Telegraphed. What I'm talking there is that because you are a consistent deck through searching and tutoring cards out of your deck, a lot of times your opponent knows exactly what your own game plan is going to be for the turn after, based on how you searched and everything like that. Not only is that an issue, the fact that you do a lot of searching in general means that your opponent always knows like anywhere from like 3 to 4 cards in your hand at any given point of the game, which means they have to think a lot less about like what is in your 5-card hand. When they saw that you tutored 3 of the 5 cards in your hand, they only have to worry about the last 2 cards and what they could be. The follower based strategy. So unlike other crafts, we don't have a lot of spells or amulets that we really like, use to like control the game that way. We do everything through our followers. We're basically the little army deck here. We're putting our men out there and just running them in. So anyone that can kind of ignore the board in that sense and use other ways to like out us is really rough. So like things that like burn damage directly is really hard for us to deal with, especially when I start talking about some of the other stuff later. If we're not forcing our opponent to trade into us, or we're like controlling the board that way, we always feel kind of like, you know, on the back step essentially. Next, board space. This doesn't come up as often with other crafts, but Swordcraft, it can come up occasionally, especially if you're pushing for damage and like trying to force your opponent to trade into you. Because we build tokens and like everything is based on our followers, there are times where if you're not careful, you can board lock yourself, and then suddenly your opponent can just ignore your board and do something to you and then pass turn. And like, even though you put them to 1, the next turn they have like the OTK essentially. They have the way to end the game out of hand, and you have no way to necessarily fix that scenario. So you got to be a little bit careful about how you spend your board space, because that is a resource that people don't really talk about too often, because we can only have 5 followers on the board at a time. Next, low ward counts. So in Swordcraft itself, there are not a lot of good followers that have ward. There's probably like maybe 2, I want to think off the top of my head, or something like that. So the fact that we don't have a lot of wards and we're completely a strategy based on followers, a lot of times we have to force our opponent to trade into our followers by like quote unquote giving them pseudo ward. And when I say pseudo ward, I mean like we put pressure on the board, and it's like if they don't deal with these cards on the board now by like crashing their own followers into them, they're going to take a lot of damage next turn. So that's kind of how we get our opponent to, you know, trade into us instead of us trading into them. Obviously some cases we do have to trade into them, because if we ignore the board also, we could just get into this race of like, you know, who dies first essentially. And the last part is there's almost no healing in Swordcraft available to you. A lot of it's outside of Swordcraft's package. It's like all in Neutralcraft if you're going to be picking up any type of healing. Because of that, our life total is actually important to us, unlike some other crafts, like for example Havencraft or even Dragon. They can play a little bit more with their life total as a resource, whereas every point of damage we take actually does matter the longer we go into the game, especially when other crafts like Dragon and like Burn, was it Forest, like burning us, can impact like how many turns left we have in the game to, you know, fulfill our strategy and win the game out. Because there's no healing, it just makes us have to make really weird decisions, and sometimes you have to just pivot and go all in and be like, you know, I'm gonna push face here. If you happen to like have an out here, then I kind of lose the game anyway. It's really rough, obviously. All right, we're going to talk about the key cards for board strength. Obviously here we have Flora Fencer. Flora Fencer is the poster child of Swordcraft itself. It is a 3-drop 3/3 that evos for 1, and when it does evo, you get a Steelclad Knight, which is a 2/2, and a 1/1 Knight. Those are both tokens that get summoned off of it. We have Otohime. Otohime comes in for 4. It takes 2 to evo. When it comes into play, it does summon a bodyguard, Otohime's bodyguard token, which is a 1/2 follower with ward. And then if you evo it, you get to summon 3 more, and any extra go into the EX area. This is one of the key ward cards that we essentially have, but this is also a card that can be really awkward for us to play, especially in the meta currently. This isn't seen as often, but it does come up occasionally because it has a princess trait. Next, we have Aurelia, Regal Saber. This is one of the key cards that you have to always think about if you're playing against Swordcraft, but for Swordcraft itself, this is either a really good one of in a deck because it's easy to search out when you know you need it, or it's like a pretty solid 5-drop overall. It has Rush, Acel, Ward, which is really good, but the big thing is it has Fanfare. You select an enemy leader if there are at least 3 cards on their side of the field. This card gets +2/+2, and the keyword Aura, making it even harder to deal with. Finally, Amelia Silver Paladin. This card is fulfills 2 roles essentially. On play, you can either deal 4 damage to an enemy follower, or you can pick a 3-cost play pointed follower in your hand and put it onto the board. So there are plays where you can, like on turn 4, Amelia play out Flora Fencer from hand for free. That's 7 play points worth of stats already on, or not stats, of just 7 play points on the board on turn 4, which is scary. And if you have an evo point, suddenly the Flora Fencer evos and you get 2 more tokens on the board, so you can build a wide board very easily with this. Next here, the key cards, Searchers. So these are the consistency tools of the deck itself. First thing here, Advent Blader, which is a brand new one that you should be watching out for. So this card is a 4-drop 4/4 that evos for 1. On evo, you get to search your deck for 2 officer traded followers. So a lot of times you're finding Novice Trooper or even Flora Fencer, Maid Leader. You can find out other searchers like that. Even Gunner Maid Saria is a search option off of it. It's a very strong, powerful card that builds up more resources into our hand. That way we don't ever run out of resources, essentially. Next, Gunner Maid Saria, I believe is how you say it. This isn't as popular, but it's a card that does get played, so you need to be aware of it. It comes into play. This is the card that searches out princess traded followers. So you're looking at Otohime, who else? Aurelia, and another card that I didn't put in this slide, but I probably should have by my mistake. But Pompous Princess, this is a card that enables a Pompous Princess strategy as well to like build a very wide board, low to the ground very quickly. Next, one of the key cards you'll probably see for a long time, which is Maid Leader. This card is a 1-drop 1/1, takes 2 to evo. On evo, you get to search your deck for a follower with evolve. So this can not only search Swordcraft followers that evolve, but also it can search anything that evolves. So you can find things like, if you need a ward, you can find Bellringer Angel. If you need if you just need anything that has evolved, you can just grab it, which is a really good search thing. So this like gets your Leonidas a lot of times, things like that. Next, Gemstaff Commander, which has been a solid 3-drop searcher, because this searches for any Swordcraft follower. As long as they're a Swordcraft follower, you can just grab it out of your deck, which is really good. And the stat line isn't the worst for a 3-drop. It's not the best, stat line, but it's one of the really good searchers. So you can like combo this with Amelia, like I talked about in the last slide, and like play Amelia and then play this out of your hand to search your deck for a follower, which is pretty cool. Next, this is the storm damage that we'll be looking at mostly. So these are the key cards that playing with and against Swordcraft, these are the things you need to keep in mind about. We have Novice Trooper. It's a 3-drop 3/3 that can attack immediately, very powerful. Next, Quick Blader. This is a 1-drop that's a 1/1 with Storm, but it does evo for 3 and it becomes a 3/3 with Storm. Very strong and powerful follower in my opinion. Getting in early with that early aggression, going turn 1 Quick Blader hit face is always fun to do. And the evo form of it too can catch people off guard, because sometimes people forget that it even exists. Next, Tsubaki, which we don't see as often anymore, but it still comes up occasionally in some lists. Tsubaki is a 5/4 that can gain Storm on play, or you have the option to destroy an enemy follower. A lot of the times this was used as a control tool or a finishing tool, so you got to keep that in mind, that this card does exist. There is a chance that 5 storm damage can come right out of hand. Finally, here we have our boy Albert Levensaber, the newest addition to the Storm family. It's a 4-drop 3/5 that evos for 3, and what makes it so good is that on evo, for the rest of the turn, this follower doesn't take combat damage, which means you can trade into something and not lose your follower at all. But what makes it so good is that it gains the strike ability, which is you refresh this follower and you perform this ability only once per turn, which means you can attack twice with this follower. So on evo, it's essentially 6 storm damage, and also kind of being a control tool, though you don't really do that too often. All right, so next here are like the control plus like combo stuff we need to talk about here, so you can keep this in mind. A very often played card nowadays is Swordsman. It's mostly in there to combo with your Leonidas, just in case if your opponent doesn't leave anything up for you to deal with the board or to crash your Leonidas in. So you got to remember, against swords, sometimes even though you hold back a follower by not attacking with it or not warding a follower up, they can force the follower to get engaged and then trade followers into it. You got to keep that in mind too as the sword player. Like one of the ways you out Soul Dealer, for example, against Abyss is you can use Swordsman to force it to get engaged, and then you can trade followers into it to remove it before they get the chance to evolve it. Next, Unbridled Fury. This card, I've seen it played either as a 3-of or not at all. It's kind of up to how you like to play the deck. But you got to keep this in mind when you're playing against Sword as well. This is one of their only spells that like is most commonly played. There are a couple other spells that get played, though not as much for like the Swordcraft package stuff. Unbridled Fury deals X damage, where X is the number of followers you have on your board. So if you attack into Swordcraft and you see they have one play point open, there's a chance that Unbridled Fury might be coming. But once again, it's based on how many followers they have on board, so you know exactly how much damage this card can do. And if you need be, you can remove followers with like spells before attacking to make sure that Unbridled Fury doesn't, you know, backfire or doesn't, you know, kill your own follower essentially. So that as the sword player, you got to remember that too. Sometimes you don't want to hold this as a quick spell, you just want to play it main phase to remove things, because you can't interact when your opponent plays spells on their turn, and only when they attack at the end of the turn. Sometimes it's better to just play this on main phase instead of waiting to see how their board develops. Next, Alexander. It's one of our new cards here. It's a 5/9 follower that has Rush and Assail, so it can come out and start attacking followers immediately and attack followers that are not engaged. But what's really good about this card is whenever it does clash damage, it re-stands itself so it can attack again. So this is one of the common control tools to control the board from getting too wide, and using only like one follower to clear up like 3 followers is pretty good. What's really cool about this card too is like you can come out, clear 3 things, and like live with like 2 health left. But because it attacked at the end, it stays standing, so it's a 5/2 that's not engaged, so it's a little bit tougher for your opponent to interact with sometimes if they don't have a spell or something to deal damage to it immediately. Usually people do though, but it's an interesting interaction to think about, because you know they can't run followers in after you clear up their board with it. Finally, this is kind of like quote unquote the combo of Swordcraft right now. Leonidas, which is a 6-drop. I believe it's a 5/6 with... Yeah, I believe it's a 5/6 with Evolve for 1. On Evolve, it becomes a 6/7. But on Evolve, you select an enemy follower, you deal 5 damage to that follower, and you deal 5 damage to Leonidas. You would think normally that would be bad, but what's really good about that is not only do we get to like blow up a 5 health follower, but we can able to rush this in immediately because we evoed to create Leonidas's Resolve, which is an amulet that gives all your other Swordcraft followers that come into play while this amulet's on the board +3/+3 in rush. So we use this Leonidas's Resolve to have our storm cards that you saw earlier come in, get +3/+3, and start swinging face immediately. When Leonidas's Resolve drops on the board and you don't have a way to deal with it, usually the following turn you're dead, because a lot of times what happens is Leonidas's Resolve gets dropped on the board, then it goes to Swordcraft's turn. And then by then, usually they just drop 2 Novice Troopers. There are 6/6 Storms now, and it only costs 6 play points. That's 12 face damage immediately. This is a card that you have to always think about right now, because every single Swordcraft deck should be playing Leonidas in some amount of counts. Most often you see it at 2 to 3 with 2 Evos in the Evo deck, because this is such a scary card to drop on the board. Once Leonidas's Resolve hits the board, and if you let it stay there for more than 1 turn, you've probably lost the game, because not only do they can end the game through storm damage, all their followers now have rush, which means they can control the board immediately and start attacking followers immediately, so you can never really develop your own board, and you just end up losing attrition that way. All right, thanks for watching, guys. If you liked this series, make sure to like, comment, subscribe like it says there. You know, let's try to get as many likes as possible, so I know that you guys like this type of series, this type of content, and I'll keep pushing it out as much as I can. If it doesn't get a lot of views and it doesn't get a lot of, you know, engagement, I might not do this for the following sets. But I think this is a really cool series, and I'm sure a lot of you are going to enjoy it. You know, once again, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and all that, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Later, everyone.